Ronald Wilson Reagan was born on February 6, 1911, in Tampico, Illinois, to his father, Edward Reagan, who was a shoe salesman, and Nell Wilson Reagan, along with his older brother Neil. They grew up in an apartment building which lacked plumbing and running water, located along their small town's main street. Ronald's nickname was Dutch, given to him by his father because, according to him, he resembled a fat little Dutchman. They moved around a lot due to his father's constantly switching sales jobs, but he graduated in 1928 from Dixon High School, where he was an athlete, student body president, and a performer in many of his school's plays. He then attended Eureka College in Illinois, where he was very active, participating in football, running track, captaining the swim team, and acting in many of the school's productions. He then graduated in 1939 and got a job as a sports announcer. In 1937, Reagan traveled to Southern California, where he covered for the Cubs' spring training season, and during that time, he also did a screen test with Warner Brothers Studios, where they signed a contract with him, and his Hollywood career took off. Later that year, he made his first debut in Love is in the Air. Over the next 3 decades, he made more than 50 films, like Win One for the Gipper. 1940, he married actress Jane Wyman and had one daughter, Maureen, and an adopted son, Michael. They sadly divorced in 1948, and in 1952, he remarried to Nancy Davis, where they had 2 kids, Patricia and Ronald. World War II came, but Ronald Reagan was disqualified for duty due to his bad eyesight, but he spent his time making training films from the Army. From 1947 to 1952, and 1959 to 1960, he served as president of the Screen Actors Guild. In 1954 to 1962, he hosted the weekly television drama series, The General Electric Theater. He, in this role, toured the U.S. as their public relations representative for General Electric, giving pro-business talks in which he spoke out against too much government control and too much government spending. In his younger years, he considered himself to be more liberal, but over time he became more conservative, and in 1960 he was considered a Republican. 1964 was when he began to be noticed by politicians because he gave a televised speech for Republican candidate Barry Goldwater. And 2 years later, Reagan ran for a political office and became the governor of California. Reagan tried on 2 occasions in 1968 and 1976 to become president, but failed on both attempts. But in 1980, he beat Jimmy Carter and won with the electoral margin of 489 to 49 and got nearly 51% of the popular vote. At age 69, he was the oldest elected U.S. president. In 1981, 2 months after his inauguration, he had an assassination attempt on him by John Hinckley Jr. John Hinckley Jr. had a psychiatric history and was sitting outside a hotel where he proceeded to shoot at the president, and one of the bullets entered the president's lung, nearly missing his heart. But gladly, shortly after this, the president was back in office again. Reagan implemented policies to reduce the government in our daily lives. This included tax cuts intended to spur growth, known as Reaganomics, and he also advocated for increases in military spending and cuts on specific social programs and measures to deregulate businesses. 1983 marked a recovery of our economy, which lasted his entire presidency. Although critics said his policies led to budget deficits and a larger national debt, and also that his programs favored the rich. Reagan's first term was marked by a large buildup of weapons and troops, as well as a buildup of the Cold War. He started programs and policies for anti-communist movements in several countries, and also programs in defense against the Soviet Union, and he took several actions in protection of the U.S. and other countries. During his second term, him and the leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, signed a historic treaty for the elimination of intermediate-range nuclear missiles. And during that same year, he spoke at Germany's Berlin Wall and challenged Gorbachev to tear it down. And 29 months later, they did that exact thing, unifying Germany. January 1989, he and his wife returned to California, where they lived in Los Angeles. And during that time, he received a letter showing that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And nearly a decade later, on June 5th, 2004, he died at age 93 and was buried in the grounds of his presidential library.